Welcome everybody. My name is Jennifer Cook. I'm the Small Acreage Management Coordinator for the Front Range here in Colorado with CSU Extension and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Welcome to our Small Acreage webinar on WaterWise landscapes for small acreages. With me today is Robert Cox. He's a horticulture agent with Arapahoe County Extension. Thanks for being here, Robert.
Sure, Jennifer.
So let's see. Before we get started, I would just remind you that the chat window is the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. So if you have questions or comments during the presentation, you can type them in there. Robert has asked that he'll hold answering your questions until the end of the presentation, but you can type them in as you think of them, and we'll hit them at the end of his talk. He also has a handout today, and there's a link in your chat box to the handout. So go ahead and click on that link, and it should open up the handout that you can look at on the screen or print out or whatever you want to do with or save. Before we get started, we'll pull up the chat or the poll. So Ruth, if you can pull up the poll question for us. So just go ahead and use your mouse and rate your knowledge of WaterWise landscaping before the presentation, and then we'll ask you again how much you've learned after the presentation, so we can measure the success of today's webinar, which is really helpful for us to continue offering programs like this in the future. So thanks for taking the time to answer this question. We'll give you a few more minutes, or a few more seconds, I guess, to answer this question. So it looks like most people think they have some knowledge of WaterWise landscaping. So that's great. I guess without further ado, I feel like I have something else to mention, but I can't think of what it might be. So without further ado, I'll just hand things over to Robert.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Sure.
Well, we're going to talk about WaterWise landscapes on small acreages today. And as it turns out, some of the very same principles that we would use in WaterWise landscaping on very small acreages are going to work here for those of you that own an acre or more. Some of you might be looking at a situation where you own property here in Colorado that is very dry, like you're seeing in this photograph, or perhaps you own 2 acres in the foothills, or maybe 3 or 4 acres on the plains, or who knows, 35 acres up in the mountains. But the principles that we're going to talk about today are going to apply uniformly pretty well no matter where you are. It's just that some of the plant materials will change. One of the things that I think is common to everybody that has a home on any kind of property, whether it's a 1/10 of an acre in Denver or 150 acres out on the eastern plains, is that everybody wants some area in on their property that they would call people space. It's near the house, it's cool, it's dirt-free there, and it's a good area for children to play and adults to play. And I think everybody wants that no matter what size of a property you might own. So what we're going to talk about is the 7 principles of WaterWise landscaping. And those are, in order, planning and design, improving the soils that you have to work with, creating practical turf grass areas, and then selecting appropriate plants that require less water, using mulches, irrigating efficiently, and maintaining the landscape properly. So let's go through that one by one. The first would be planning and designing. In this case, for water conservation, and you want some beauty and some utility in that landscape around your home. So one of the things that you can do is just to make a bubble diagram. And a bubble diagram would look something like this, where the pointer is, where you are essentially just drawing out with bubbles what kinds of activities are going to occur in what part of your on what part of your property near the home. You might have some areas for lawns. You might have shrub beds and flower beds, or fruit and vegetable gardens, a place for the kids to play, a place for the pets. Some areas that might be left natural, and some that don't even have any plants whatsoever. Then you can convert that bubble diagram to a actual landscape plan. And this doesn't have to be real formalized. Again, it can be something that is hand-drawn. Or you might choose to have this done professionally through a landscape architect with some kind of a plan that way for your property. Number 2 would be to improve the soil. And basically what that means is that you are going to be adding, by mixing in, some organic matter into the soil. And that has many, many benefits. In sandy soils, it's going to help those sandy soils hold more water than they would without any organic matter in the soil. If you have a loam or a clayey soil, adding the organic matter improves the texture further, and it reduces the compaction of that soil. It also has an effect on rooting depth, because a well-amended soil that has organic matter added to it is going to allow those plants to develop deeper root systems. As you see in this drawing here, it's going to end up with a deeper root system. And that means it's going to be able to have access to water down lower in the soil profile. As opposed to the plant here, which is in unamended soil, which is going to develop a shallower root system, and unfortunately have to be watered a little more frequently. The next principle of WaterWise landscaping is to create practical turf areas. In other words, you want to use turf grass in some areas to play on and to walk on, but it doesn't mean that you have to cover every square foot with turf grass. That becomes kind of a difficult thing to maintain. For example, when you have steep slopes like this, not only is it a hazard to mow areas like this, but it's also difficult to water that well because the water tends to run down those slopes and it's hard to keep it moist enough. So steep slopes are maybe not the best place to have turf grass. Let's remind everyone now that Kentucky bluegrass, although it has kind of a negative or politically incorrect sort of reputation right now, it is a well-adapted grass for Colorado, and it does many of the things that we want it to do. But what we have to consider is that how much of it do you actually want to maintain? What alternatives could you plant? And where are you going to use it exactly? Again, kind of related to how much of it you're going to have. Let's select our turf grass based on the actual use of the site. If you want something that is higher quality and great appearance, usually that's going to mean that you have a little bit of a higher water demand, as in this photograph. And if your expectations are for lower quality turf grass that doesn't have to be quite as great looking, maybe you can get by with a grass that will have a lower water demand. WaterWise landscaping is about matching your expectations with the actual intended use of that site. Let's remember too that grass really provides a lot of significant environmental and people benefits to your landscape. The fourth tenet of WaterWise landscaping or principle is to select plants that are appropriate for our climate. That means that they don't necessarily have to be native, but they do have to be well adapted here. And then secondly, we have to group them or plant them according to their water needs, or what is called hydrozoning. And all that really means, hydrozoning just really means, well, we'll get to that in just a second here. Hydrozoning is basically planting plants of like water needs together, rather than mixing plants together that have vastly different water needs. Some plants that you might consider in your landscape, especially if you are out east on the plains and on 35-acre property or something, Prairie Coneflower. And Prairie Coneflower comes in both a red version and also a yellow version. Really an attractive, low-maintenance, drought-tolerant plant. Penstemons. There are many, many different penstemons that are all attractive when they're in flower. Virtually all of them could be considered WaterWise. And here you have one called Palmer Penstemon with the arrow. Here you have one called Firecracker Penstemon with the hummingbird checking it out. And this is Rocky Mountain Penstemon. All of them would be good choices for low water landscapes. Another one is the Gaillardia, or blanket flower. This is a very widely planted sort of daisy, and again, another drought-tolerant plant that works well in many, many instances. California poppy is just an annual, but it reseeds itself readily, and it thrives in dryland situations and will reward you with a lot of yellow flowers that are widely enjoyed by people on small acreages or very small acreages or large acreages for that matter. A shrub that you might consider, Apache plume. Very drought tolerant, very attractive when it's in flower, and it has these pinkish sort of plumes that develop after the flowers, as you can see in that photo. Very attractive, very low maintenance, easy to care for. Apache plume probably would not work for those of you above 8,000 feet, but below 8,000 would be a good choice. Similarly, the Pinon tree, which is the state tree of New Mexico, you know it's a drought-tolerant plant, and this would also be a tree or a shrubby-looking tree that would grow very well for those of you below 7,500 feet. Many sagebrushes or artemisias are good choices in WaterWise landscapes. Rabbitbrush or Chamisa lends some great fall color with its yellow flowering in September and October, and it has this, many of them have this very grayish blue looking foliage that's also attractive when the plant is not in flower. Again, a very, very drought tolerant sort of plant. Gas plant is a fun one. It's drought tolerant. Gas plant is so called because it emits a gas that you can actually strike a match near the flowers and actually have it ignite that gas. So be careful with that. But very attractive, very drought tolerant. And then a tree that you might consider, many people don't think of it as a xeriscape or WaterWise tree, but that would be crabapple. Many different crabapples to choose from with attractive flowers in the spring, attractive fruit displays often, and even attractive bark when they get to be older. So don't forget crabapples in the landscape. And then here are just a couple of photographs of some widely planted WaterWise plants. In the upper left, we have a hyssop called sunset hyssop, Russian sage, blue avena grass. Here we have autumn joy sedum. Again, all good choices for low water landscapes. Hydrozoning, as I mentioned before, is grouping plants according to their irrigation need and then actually watering that area according to that need. Here you can see on the left a routinely irrigated flower bed versus a larger naturalized area that receives no watering whatsoever. It just receives natural rainfall. The objective of hydrozoning is, as I mentioned earlier, put the low water requiring plants together in the zones that actually receive very little irrigation. I want to remind everyone too that even the low water plants, or what we call xeric plants, do need some rainfall or irrigation while they're getting established or after you've planted them. You can't just plant them, water them once, and completely forget about them. They do need some follow-up watering to become established before they are on their own water-wise. The fifth principle is to make sure that you are watering efficiently with appropriate irrigation methods. Based on community water use figures, they've shown that about 40% of the water that gets applied in landscape irrigation is wasted due to poor irrigation design or maintenance or management. And sometimes sprinkler systems are put in without any real forethought for the water conservative aspect at all. Just remember too, another aspect of hydrozoning here is what we're going to look at here, is that we want to zone our plants by their exposure to sun and to heat and to wind, and then water them accordingly. For example, here you see a typical lawn area near the home, and that is in a sunny area, and our water use could be reflected as a 1x water use, as opposed to that same sort of lawn that is on the southwest side of that house where it's hot and there's a lot of reflected heat, and maybe it's even on a slope, so you know it's hot there. And our water use there might be as much as twice as much as you're giving to that back area. So irrigate trees, shrubs, and perennials efficiently. Drip hoses work well. Soaker hoses work well. Drip emitters. Drip irrigation is really a good way to go on this. Then our sixth principle of WaterWise landscaping is to use mulches. And they have several benefits. Mulches help reduce evaporation from the soil, and that's the main thing that we are considering here. Using mulches, or about 2 to 3 inches of something like wood chips, bark chunks as you see in the photograph here, pea gravel, or even rock, does make a difference in your landscape, the amount of water that you have to apply to that landscape. Some people would choose to place those mulches over some kind of a weed fabric to keep the weeds really from penetrating the mulch. Here are some more benefits of mulching. We're going to reduce that evaporation from the soil by 25 to 50%. If it's an organic mulch like wood chips or bark chunks or straw or something like that, that material in contact with the soil does promote soil microorganisms, and that's a good thing. It reduces soil compaction. It's going to reduce the number of annual weeds you have in your landscape, and it's going to prevent erosion. Now, I've heard people say, okay, I've heard that mulches are going to reduce or prevent weeds. Well, that doesn't mean that you can put down 3 inches of mulch over something like field bindweed and expect to get rid of it. That is not going to work. But the mulches will do a good job on preventing or at least reducing the number of annual weeds that you have in the landscape. And lastly, it is going to prevent erosion, or at least significantly reduce the amount of wind and rain erosion that you might experience. Just a couple of warnings here. Wood chip mulch is a great thing to use around your trees over the planting area, as in this photograph. But what we don't want to do with that is really stack it up around the trunk, as you see in the photograph there.
Okay. So sorry about that. We just lost connection. Hopefully everyone can hear us again. Go ahead, Robert.
Okay. So just a reminder not to make those mulch volcanoes around your trees in the landscape. that is actually going to be a negative thing. Instead, spread that out so it's about 2 or 3 inches deep over the whole area, not stacked up around the trunk. What that does is it softens the bark and keeps it wet, and a lot of microorganisms, fungi and so on, can get a head start that way. So we don't want to use mulches that way. But mulches are really a very good thing in your WaterWise landscape. A problem for many of you, in fact probably most of you, after all we live in Colorado, is that chips, wood chips, that type of thing as a mulch are going to blow away in windy areas. When you use shredded type chips that are of different sizes, that's usually a little more wind resistant. Some people even put down bird netting over it through the winter to keep it in place. Now I wanted to highlight one other thing here. Some innovative person, I love this photograph, but some innovative person used wine bottle corks as a mulch in their landscape. Probably makes a pretty good mulch, but I'll just hasten to add that if you are drinking enough wine to make mulches out of, that's probably quite a bit of wine. And then finally, the last principle of WaterWise landscaping is to make sure that we are maintaining our landscape with good horticultural practices. Because when you do that, the healthiest plants are going to be more tolerant of insect and disease problems. And they generally have fewer insect and disease problems anyway. So that's the 7th and last principle of WaterWise landscaping. And then I thought you might enjoy that photograph. Let's shift gears now a little bit to talk about the actual turf grass area in your landscape on your small acreage. There are some questions that you need to ask yourself before deciding on which species of turf grass to use. First, what is the intended use of that turf grass? How am I going to use it? Is it going to be hosting kids playing soccer a lot on it daily? Or is the only foot traffic it's going to get is when I mow it? What is the desired quality level? How much are you, and then how much are you willing to provide care for it? What are the resources that I have available? Do I have a dependable source of water? And then next, do I have any soil-related problems or problems with my water source? Like maybe my water source is saline or too salty. What about shade? Is there a lot of shade in the area where I want to grow a lawn area? Either now or later there might be with tree growth. What is my elevation? If my elevation is 9,000 feet, my choices are more limited than if my elevation is 6,000 feet. And then finally, what is this type of grass that I want to grow? Is it available as sod, or is seed my only option? Let's talk just a little bit quickly about some growth habits of grasses that you might use in your landscape. Grasses are either going to be rhizomatous, where they form rhizomes and send up new shoots from those rhizomes, or they might be stoloniferous, where they have the above ground stolons that root where they touch moist soil, kind of like strawberries do. Or grasses might not be sod forming at all. They might just be a bunch type of grass where what you see is what you get, and that one plant remains one plant forever. It doesn't spread other than maybe enlarging a little bit in diameter. Next, we have to discern the difference between cool season grasses and warm season grasses. Cool season grasses are going to have, they're going to prefer to grow when it's about 60 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And they're going to be green here in most of Colorado from late March until June. And then we kind of force them to stay alive by watering them. They might go dormant in the heat of summer and then revive with summer rains and remain green until November. Cool season grasses are really not going to put on much shoot growth during heat and drought stress, but we might force them to grow by watering and fertilizing and so forth. Some examples of cool season grasses is What everybody knows is Kentucky bluegrass and other bluegrasses, fescue, ryegrass, and wheatgrass. Warm season grasses, on the other hand, like to grow when it's hot. They love it 80 to 95 degrees or even hotter. However, they're not going to green up here until probably mid-May, and then they're going to go dormant brown when we receive our first hard frost. If you had to make a generalization, warm season grasses are more drought tolerant than cool season grasses overall. And some good examples would be Bermuda grass, buffalo grass, our own native here, and then blue grama, which is also native and actually the state grass of Colorado. Now, if we want to look at grasses that are going to survive best without much water, probably our best ones would be those warm season grasses like buffalo grass, blue grama, and Bermuda grass. Some pretty good turf survival without water can be had from Kentucky bluegrass, fescues, and so on. And then maybe your worst choices for persistence under neglect and no water would be perennial ryegrass and tall fescue. They might survive a few months without any irrigation, but they're really going to thin out badly. So let's look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of each grass that you can use in your landscape. Let's start with Kentucky bluegrass because it is the most widely planted lawn grass in Colorado. Maybe 85 to 90% of all lawns in Colorado are Kentucky bluegrass. First of all, Kentucky bluegrass is a high quality grass, and it recuperates really well from foot traffic. That's why they use it on sports fields, like at Sports Authority Field in Denver, Coors Field in Denver, and so on. It is a sod former. It develops rhizomes. And it is fairly stress resistant. But it does, on the negative side, the negative qualities of Kentucky bluegrass, it does form quite a bit of thatch. It's not very shade tolerant. It is disease prone. And then, as we all know, it does have relatively high water and fertilizer requirements. I'll call in nitrogen that you're applying in the form of fertilizer. There are some varieties of Kentucky bluegrass, which I will now abbreviate as KBG. There are some varieties of Kentucky bluegrass that have been observed or tested and researched to remain pretty green during drought. Some of those varieties I've listed for you here. Those varieties are more drought tolerant than other varieties of Kentucky bluegrass. And if you print this handout out, you will have all of those at your disposal. Here's some more of them. These are all considered more drought tolerant than other varieties of Kentucky bluegrass. Let's remember that they might have some negative qualities too. They might be more disease prone, they might be strong thatch formers, and so on. But they are drought tolerant. Or more drought tolerant than other varieties of Kentucky bluegrass. You might be interested to know that there are now hybrid bluegrasses available that are hybrids of Kentucky bluegrass and Texas bluegrass. And these hybrids have been developed probably in the last 20 years or so. The first one was developed at Texas A&M, and it was called Reveille. This bluegrass, this hybrid bluegrass, a cross of Kentucky and Texas bluegrass, has been shown to be more heat tolerant, more drought tolerant than other varieties of Kentucky, just plain old Kentucky bluegrass. So it has some advantages that way. So we know that it's going to tolerate heat pretty well. The hybrid is going to tolerate drought pretty well. What we don't know in long term is how well it's going to tolerate some diseases or if it's going to be resistant to insects. So that's a little bit of an unknown right now here in Colorado. But nevertheless, these hybrids are now being sold either as sod or as seed, and they have quite a bit of potential here in Colorado. Some of the research that was done at CSU actually has shown that the hybrid bluegrasses actually have more extensive and deeper roots. They grow a little bit more slowly, and they actually have a little lower rate of water use when compared to regular Kentucky bluegrass. Here's a list of some of the hybrid bluegrass varieties available out there now. There are several available, some more widely available than others, but you can certainly check on these hybrids if you are interested in using hybrid bluegrass in your landscape. Let's shift to talk about another grass that is considered somewhat drought tolerant, called tall fescue. Tall fescue is one of those grasses that you would have to consider a tough grass, and it is indeed tough. The quality of the lawn that you're going to get with tall fescue is maybe just a little bit lower than it would be with Kentucky bluegrass, but still very acceptable. The other thing that tall fescue is going to benefit you in is that it has fewer insect or disease problems. It has a lower nitrogen fertilizer requirement, and it might actually save you some water. Here's a photograph. This is actually not tall fescue except these clumps. The clumps that you're seeing here are tall fescue in a bluegrass lawn, and it's got a noticeably different texture. It's much clumpier, it grows faster, slows the mower down. And where many of us are familiar with tall fescue is as a weed in our Kentucky bluegrass lawns. But when it is 100% of the lawn, it can actually look very nice and save you a little bit of water potentially. Some more things about tall fescue. There are many types now available that are called turf types, and they have been improved to be more usable as turf grass in landscapes. Oftentimes these are grown as a sod on netting or something, because this is not a sod-forming grass. It doesn't have rhizomes, doesn't have stolons, so they grow it on netting as a sod, or you can sow it as seed at about 8 to 9 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Now it might develop a deeper root system in our soils, and it might not. If it is able to develop a deeper root system, it will be more drought tolerant. If it's not able to develop a deep root system, it probably won't be any more drought tolerant than Kentucky bluegrass. Some other disadvantages with tall fescue is that it really can't recuperate from high levels of foot traffic because it's a bunch grass. You have to mow it more frequently than you would Kentucky bluegrass. And it does have somewhat tougher leaves that are going to dull your mower blades more quickly. So you might want to keep a couple of sharper mower blades on hand to change out. Here's the graphic that I wanted you to see about tall fescue and its potential to develop a deeper root system than Kentucky bluegrass would, if the soil will allow that. If you have a compacted clay soil, it's not going to do this. But if you have a deep, well-drained soil that you've amended, then maybe tall fescue will be able to develop this deeper root system and give you some drought tolerance, because it has access to water deeper in the soil than Kentucky bluegrass would have. Here are some other shots of tall fescue in the landscape. Here you can see tall fescue at one of the Fort Collins city buildings. And again in the lower left, tall fescue on the bottom and buffalo grass on the top. Perennial ryegrass. Perennial ryegrass is a very high quality grass for your lawn. It is not going to form thatch because it is a bunch grass. Tolerates traffic well, germinates very quickly, and establishes very quickly. However, you cannot buy it as sod because it's a bunch grass. And because it's a bunch grass, it doesn't recuperate real well from heavy foot traffic. But what a nice grass it is. The leaves are shiny. It just looks like a shimmering grass off in the distance. Some disadvantages with it or maybe I should say other disadvantages, are that it does not cut real well with a rotary lawnmower. Better to use a reel mower. It does need high levels of nitrogen fertilizer, and if it doesn't get enough nitrogen fertilizer, it will tend to form seed heads. Let's look at another option that is maybe one of the more drought tolerant cool season grasses that we could grow, and that's called crested wheatgrass. Crested wheatgrass has several advantages that you might want to think about, one being very good tolerance of heat, cold, and drought, and it has a low fertility requirement. Crested wheatgrass would be a great choice for your small acreage landscape. On the negative side, when it gets pretty hot, it is going to enter, hot or dry, it's going to enter dormancy fairly quickly and turn brown on you. But it'll come out of that quickly too if it gets some water and some cooler weather. Another negative is that it doesn't really form a dense sod, and so you might see a few weeds coming through it. It is going to need some water and fertilizer to look its best. Got to mow it high. It's got to be mowed at about 3 inches or higher. And it can feel a little bit stemmy feeling when you walk on it. There are several named varieties or cultivars available for you as seed. Let's talk about fine fescue. Fine fescues have several advantages and also some disadvantages too. Some of the advantages that they have is that we were talking about low fertility, tolerates stress well, has very fine texture and good density, but its main selling point, and this is important in some instances, is that it's one of the most shade tolerant of all of our grasses that we can use as a lawn. On the negative side, they don't tolerate traffic real well. They don't do well in 3 straight weeks of 95 degrees. They'll enter dormancy and turn brown. So this might work a little bit better for those of you that are at higher elevations, let's say 6,000 feet and higher. Here's a golf course that was being, it was all grown from seed, and some of the seed ended up, when they scattered the seed, some of the seed ended up on this rocky area. That's fine fescue, growing just fine on that rocky area, so you know it's a tough and drought-tolerant grass. The fine fescues is kind of an umbrella term, but there are several of those available to you. There's red fescue, creeping red fescue, chewings fescue, hard fescue, and sheep fescue. When you go to the store or the seed store and buy what might be called a shady mix, it's going to have some of these fine fescues in it because they are shade-tolerant grasses. Now, just a real quick slide for your entertainment here. I thought you might enjoy this. What in the world happened here? We've got all these footprints showing up on a turf grass area. And since we can't answer that on a typed-in basis, I will just go ahead and tell you that what happened here is that someone was spraying Roundup in an area and was walking on the sprayed area and got some Roundup on the bottom of their shoes. And now you can see what that Roundup herbicide has done to their lawn area. Really nice footprints. Let's talk about another cool season grass called smooth brome. Smooth brome is a widely used roadside grass. It gets used in pastures and so on. And it can make a utilitarian sort of lawn if you want to grow it as a lawn. Some of the benefits that it would have are that it is extremely tolerant of heat and cold and drought. It's got a low fertility requirement. Very persistent under neglect. And it is sod forming, but those rhizomes that it has to form sod are kind of invasive. It will get into areas that you may not want it unless you physically prevent that. Also, on the negative side, smooth brome doesn't really have high density to it, and so you may see some weeds invading it. The leaves are fairly wide and coarse, and this is only available as a seed option. You cannot buy from any sod producer a smooth brome sod. Let's shift now to talk about some warm season grasses. First of all, let's talk about Bermuda grass. This warm season grass is what's used a lot in the South. It gets used a lot in Southern California, Arizona, and so on. But for the most part, it's not going to do real well as a lawn in Colorado. However, there are some experimental varieties that show good cold hardiness here. The thing we have to be careful about with Bermuda grass is that it's very invasive and very aggressive. So unless you have 35 acres, this might not be something that you want to plant as a lawn, because it will move around and it will become a weed in your neighbor's property if you're not careful. And it is very difficult to eradicate, but certainly a drought-tolerant option. Let's move on to our next warm season grass, which is our native buffalo grass. Again, many different advantages for you to consider with buffalo grass. It is stress tolerant, low fertility requirement. It forms sod, but again, those sod forming units, stolons, may be invasive. You can choose not to mow this grass at all if you want. It can be established a number of different ways, from seed, sod, which is fairly expensive, or plugs that you just plug into the ground and let them spread. Another good advantage is that it has very few insect and disease problems. Some disadvantages of buffalo grass that you should know about is, first of all, it doesn't really tolerate shade real well. Some shade okay, not full shade. It doesn't really tolerate foot traffic real well. So this is not the grass to use on a baseball diamond or a soccer field or any area that you anticipate lots of foot traffic. It is dormant brown for most of the year. As a warm season grass, it's going to be brown from October until May. However, that might be an advantage for you because it's not using water then. The biggest complaint most people have about using buffalo grass as a turf is that they have a lot of weed problems. And that's probably the biggest thing. And then last disadvantage is that it really doesn't work well as a turf grass if you live above 6,500 feet. This is a lower elevation turf grass choice. Here you see a couple of photos of buffalo grass. It's actually what we call a dioecious grass. It has male plants with the pollen-bearing units here, and then its other plants are female, with the seed more down lower into the plant. Here again you see the male and female buffalo grass plants. There are also turf-type buffalo grasses that have been bred and developed specifically for use as a turf, as a lawn. Some of those are available as seed only, so you're going to get male and female plants. Some of them are available only vegetatively as sod or as plugs, and often those are female only. Legacy and Prestige are very good ones. I would urge you not to plant 609, the variety called 609, because it is marginal for winter hardiness here in Colorado. Unless you live in Pueblo or Grand Junction, 609 is probably not going to be your best choice of buffalo grass varieties. As I mentioned earlier, you can choose to leave buffalo grass unmowed, where it's going to develop these stolons and male flowers, or you can choose to mow it at 2 inches, 3 inches. It isn't too particular. And it looks pretty good that way, or unmowed, your choice. Kind of an advantage that way. Here's a nice golf course out in Stratton, Colorado, entirely buffalo grass. Here's a nice home lawn that is entirely buffalo grass. And the city of Boulder used a lot of buffalo grass in many of their medians that still look good. As I mentioned earlier, buffalo grass is expensive sod. So what some people will choose to do is this checkerboard thing where you're not covering 100% of your area with buffalo grass sod, but only 50%. And then the hope is that gradually buffalo grass will fill into these open areas. Realistically, what happens usually is that weeds move into those areas more quickly than the buffalo grass does. So that's something that you have to be aware of. Here you see dormant buffalo grass in probably November or late October. And of course, the cool season grass, tall fescue, is still green at that time. Let's move on to our last warm season grass that we'll talk about. That's blue grama. And this is actually the state grass of Colorado. Maybe some of you already knew that. It is a warm season bunch grass. Doesn't spread by stolons or rhizomes. And it's got some advantages too. Low fertility needs. Very few insect and disease problems. And of course, as a native, you know it is heat, cold, and drought tolerant. Some of the negative things about it as a lawn would be that it is dormant brown from October to May. It is a warm season grass. Best below 6,500 feet as a lawn. It only has poor to fair foot traffic tolerance. If you have several big St. Bernards and you want a lawn area for them, this is not the grass to use. It only has poor to fair shade tolerance. And finally, the seed is expensive. Sod is not available because it's a bunch grass. There are some named varieties of blue grama that work very well for turf. And there was a former staff member here at CSU who was in the agronomy department that really was interested in promoting blue grama as a turf grass. Some of his research suggested that the variety called Alma worked very well for turf grass use. The varieties Hachita and Lovington work very well also. Some people choose to mix blue grama, a warm season grass, with another warm season grass, buffalo grass, to use as their lawn. Works out very well. Here are some more shots of blue grama as a lawn for you to see. A little bit of a summary now regarding grass choices. And the summary would say that all of our grass choices that we can use as lawns here in Colorado need some input. To keep them looking like a lawn and have some density to them and allow them to receive some foot traffic, we have to provide some input in the form of some water at least, some fertilizer. We may need to mow them unless you have buffalo grass, and we may need it to even core aerate them. Next, all grasses that you might choose have some advantages and some disadvantages. And you'll want to match as many advantages as you can to your site and be aware of any disadvantages as well. Here's a good relative amount of water comparison for you to see here. We get about 15 inches of rainfall in most parts of Colorado, more at higher elevations and lower for those of you out in Grand County or Pueblo County. But a good high quality Kentucky bluegrass lawn is going to need about 34 inches of water per year. So you're going to need to apply about 19 or 20. Tall fescue, probably only about 31 inches of water a year. And since we get about 15, you're going to have to apply about 16 and so on. All the way down to our lowest amount of water applied would be to something like buffalo grass. And it needs about 17 inches of water per year. So you may have to apply an inch or two depending on where you live. Establishing a lawn. Lawns can be established from seed or from sod. However, sod of many different varieties is not available. Sod sold in Colorado is almost entirely Kentucky bluegrass, although there is some buffalo grass being sold. The best time to establish cool season sodded grasses like Kentucky bluegrass, anytime from March to November. If you want to seed it, you have a couple of different options. You can use like a whirlybird spreader or a drop spreader, or you may want to hire someone to do what we call hydro seeding. And the best time to do this for a cool season lawn is probably April or May in most of Colorado, or mid to late August through maybe mid-September for cool season grasses, depending on where you live. And for warm season grasses, probably May through about early August. Let's go through a few WaterWise lawn tips now for you to be aware of and to look for in your landscape. One would be that you can always look at your lawn and watch for signs of what we call footprinting. When you're taking steps through the lawn like this and you see that the lawn looks a little more blue-gray color, maybe those footprints are not bouncing back very quickly and the footprints remain for several minutes or even hours, that's an indication to you that that lawn needs water. But you can use this to your advantage. You can water it heavily after you see this footprinting and then wait to water again until you see the footprinting again. It's a good way to establish a watering routine. Another tip is that we want to try to water at night if at all possible, especially for those of you that will have some kind of an automatic sprinkler system. The hours between about 10 in the evening and 7 in the morning are great times to water your lawn because the lawn's wet with dew then anyway. It's not going to hurt to additionally water it. This is a great time to apply water to your lawn. Another thing that can be very beneficial for your lawn area, particularly if your lawn gets a lot of foot traffic or if your lawn is growing on clayey soil, is to do what we call core aeration. Like you see here where the machine is pulling plugs directly out of the soil and leaving it right on the surface for you to mistake for something else. These plugs, pulling the plugs out of the soil is a very good thing. It's a WaterWise practice because it allows water to infiltrate that soil better, air to get into that soil better, and it just makes your lawn a healthier one. And if your lawn is a healthy one, it is more WaterWise. So core aeration is a good thing to do. Spring, let's say the month of April or May, and or fall, late August, sometime in the month of September. It's a great time to do this. And you might even want to rent or purchase a core aerating machine for that purpose. The next tip that I want to convey to you is that mowing high is always going to make your lawn a more WaterWise lawn. Setting your lawnmower blade at 3 inches and then mowing your lawn frequently enough so that you're not removing more than 1/3 of the blade height. This is a really good WaterWise practice because as you increase the mowing height, the depth of your rooting is going to increase also. And when you start cutting lower on your grass, your root growth is also not as significant. So by having a higher lawn cut here, like 3 inches, you're going to encourage the grass to be deeper rooting, and that will be reflected in less water that you have to apply to it. So mow high. The next tip that I want to throw at you for WaterWise lawn is to make sure that you're fertilizing warm season grasses during the warm season, June or July. We don't change. We don't do that just like we would with other grasses that we're more familiar with. If you want to use a warm season grass lawn like buffalo grass or blue grama, we have to fertilize it during the warm season. Conversely, we don't want to fertilize cool season grasses during the absolute hottest time of the summer. The best time to fertilize your lawn with nitrogen if you have a cool season lawn is late summer and fall. That's the time to be applying the bulk of your fertilizer, and more lightly in the spring and early summer. Not at all in the heat of summer. Whenever possible, another lawn tip is to make sure that your sprinklers, whatever you're using as a sprinkler, is a type that would be considered one that throws out larger droplets in a lower trajectory, like this type of rainbird sprinkler here, or this type of nozzle, or one of these that is going to produce a low trajectory spray with larger droplets. That's always more water-wise than a situation where you are using a sprinkler head of some type that creates a lot of mist and it really just atomizes the water, or throws it way up in the air in a high trajectory. And that's where a lot of Kentucky bluegrass unpopularity or politically incorrect feeling comes from, is that we see these types of watering going on and it's running down the street, or it's being atomized as a fine mist, and not all of it gets to the grass. So if you'll use low trajectory sprinkler heads with large droplets, that's always better. And this type, this oscillating type, is really one of the worst for that, because it throws water way up in the air where it's subject to being blown away by winds or just evaporating before it ever hits the ground. Last WaterWise lawn tip is to make sure that you respond to the brown areas with hand watering rather than with just turning on your entire sprinkler system to water the entire lawn. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, sorry about the delay there. I thought you might appreciate that shot of a lawnmower that had been hydro-seeded. Another funny shot for you. Okay, I think we have a few minutes now to take questions, and if you will go ahead and type in any questions that you have, I will try to answer them for you. Some may take longer than others.
So, Robert, before we go ahead and do questions, why don't we bring up a poll in case people need to sign off and they don't want to stick around for questions. Go ahead and answer how much you think you've learned after Robert's presentation. And also, I wanted to mention, I remembered what I forgot at the beginning, 2 things: that this webinar is being recorded, or has been recorded, so it'll be available on the Small Acreage Management website for you to review, and I'll send everybody the link to that. And additionally, the Society of Range Management has offered 1 continuing education credit for those of you who are watching this webinar live. And if you're interested in receiving that CEU credit, you can email John Rizza, and Ruth, can you type in? It's john.rizza@colostate.edu, and I'll email that information to everyone as well.
Okay, can I go ahead and try to answer some questions?
Yeah, let's go ahead and take some questions.
All right. Let's see. The first question that we had was from Carol. And Carol, you asked, if there's time, could you discuss the best grasses to use in an irrigated pasture used to graze sheep? Carol, that's really not my specialty area very much, but one would certainly be crested wheatgrass, maybe something like smooth brome, and maybe Jennifer has a good answer for that too.
If you have an irrigated pasture, I would go with Timothy or orchard grass. Those are kind of the really palatable grasses that do really well with irrigation.
And is this the same Carol? Has a question also about a rotary versus a reel mower. The reel mowers are the types that you had to push them, and they had the vertically turning blades. And it was kind of nice to use those because if the grass got too long, they just wouldn't work at all. So it kind of forced you to mow frequently enough. Versus a rotary mower, which is the type many people use now, in which the blades rotate in a horizontal fashion. Carol, does that help any? I don't have a good picture of a real lawnmower, but that was the type that was used as a push type, usually non-motorized back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Okay. What can I use yet this season, asks Gwen, for weeds in my buffalo grass lawn? Gwen, I have to tell you, there are several herbicides that work well on weeds, but so much of that is based on Kentucky bluegrass and other cool season lawns. Some of those herbicides might not work really well in buffalo grass and might actually damage the buffalo grass. I can't give you a good answer for that right now. That would be something that I would need to look up. And if you wanted to email me at robert.cox@colostate.edu, I would be glad to help you with that, but it's not something that I know right offhand what good herbicides will knock out weeds in a buffalo grass lawn. Pam is asking if you could core aerate only once per year, would you recommend spring or fall? Pam, it doesn't really matter that much. Just do it really thoroughly when you do it. Probably spring, I would go ahead and say, is maybe a little bit more advantageous. Just make sure that you're making several passes so that you end up with lots of holes in the ground on 2 or 3 inch centers. If you make just one pass and it's putting a hole every 12 to 16 inches, it's almost not even worth doing. Lisa Clark asks, I've just got some blue grama seed to sow. Should I wait until May 2013 to sow it, or can I sow it now? Lisa, it's probably kind of borderline to do it right now. You might notice that it could germinate now and then be damaged by cold snaps. I would wait. And Jennifer, I bet you have a pretty good answer for that too. She lives in Walsenburg.
Yeah, I think I would probably wait until or in the spring at this point.
Okay. So let's wait until April or May of 2013.
Or at least after the frost, right? The last frost.
Yeah. Barbara, what can you tell us about, I'm not sure what, genetically enhanced Kentucky bluegrass?
The hybrids, maybe?
Barbara, if you can go ahead and type in and ask what you mean by GE. I'm genetically engineered. Genetically engineered Kentucky bluegrass. Well, in one sense, all the varieties of Kentucky bluegrass are genetically engineered because they're bred specifically for a specific purpose. So some of them now actually have endophytes in them, which will be something that will make it less edible by animals, but it might actually have more disease or drought resistance built into it by having endophytes in it. I'm not sure I can answer that question really well. But to some extent, you might say that most varieties of Kentucky bluegrass that are on the market now are genetically engineered in that sense. Bill, is liquid lawn aeration as proposed by landscapers any good or a scam? Bill, that is really something that is, I'll have to say, if given the choice between any good or a scam, it's closer to being a scam. Liquid lawn aeration just can't substitute for the physical remediation or physical aeration that you provide to a soil or a lawn growing on a certain soil. Liquid lawn aeration, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't waste my time or money on it. It's just nowhere near as good as the physical sort of core aeration. Is Revive of any value when applied with organic fertilizer? Yes. Revive is a good product. It is essentially a wetting agent, and it's turf specific. It is meant for applying to lawns. Does a good job. You know, it's certainly worth using. You're in the Denver Metro with Kentucky bluegrass. Yeah, so Bill, what I would tell you is that Revive can be of some value. Liquid lawn aeration, no. Jim Crick is asking, he wants a post-emergent herbicide for buffalo grass. Yeah, carfentrazone, clopyrrolid, imazapic, metsulfuron. Yeah, thank you, Jim. Many of those are good choices. I think we have to be really careful about which ones of those are suggested for use on buffalo grass. Bill is asking, my lawn company also recommends a midsummer fertilization along with spring and fall plus fertilization. Is this overkill? Generally speaking, Bill, it's not a great idea to force Kentucky bluegrass to grow more in the heat of midsummer, with a couple of exceptions. If you have a lot of foot traffic on this lawn and it is getting, kids baseball and soccer, and there's you host weekly lawn parties and there's just all kinds of foot traffic on that lawn, then yes, some fertilizer in midsummer and water can help with that, or help the recovery from all the foot traffic. If you don't have a lot of foot traffic on your lawn, then I would tell you to back off of the midsummer fertilization and just go with lightly in spring, maybe a little heavier in early summer, and then heaviest of all in mid-October. I hope that answers your question, Bill. And it says that you are typing another question. Okay, no foot traffic at all, says Bill. Mix of shade and full sun. Then I would tell you that it's probably not necessary that you apply that midsummer fertilization. Just have it applied most heavily in mid-October and later at other times of the year, but not at all in the heat of midsummer. Let's say from mid-June to early August. I wouldn't fertilize that Kentucky bluegrass lawn at all. Hope that answers your questions, and I hope that everybody picked up something that they can use on their property.
Looks like Betty has a question about rabbits.
Oh, Betty says, how do I keep rabbits off the lawn? Betty, I don't have I'm not a wildlife specialist at all, but there are rabbit repellents that you can use. Blood meal works somewhat. Having a dog really does a good job, though. That's one of your best bets. And I would encourage you to think about having a dog if you don't already. But I'm sorry, I don't feel like I can answer your question about keeping rabbits off of the lawn really well, other than to say that you might want to try the repellents.
Okay. It looks like we might have another question coming in. Sharon's typing. I wonder if that's Sharon Bogan answering our question about rabbits.
Oh, there we go.
It could be.
You think
I don't know if Sharon's on or not.
Yeah, she says to keep rabbits off, use
good.
repellents or fence off the area.
Thanks, Sharon.
Good. Thank you so much, Sharon.
All right, so if no one else has questions, hi Sharon Boken. If no one else has questions, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Our next webinar is August 31st on apples, so join us for that if you're interested.